Audio Jungle.
Valued at over $30 billion, Louis Vuitton ranks as the #1 luxury brand in the world. The incredible history of the company and its founder dates back to the 19th century and begins with a boy who was dealt an unfortunate hand of fate and could only dream of happiness. LV was born on 4th August 1821 in a city called Angers in France. His parents were poor farmers. During that time period, France was ravaged by the Napoleonic Wars, and many farmers, including Louis' family, faced starvation and bankruptcy. Given the family's economic situation, LV had no choice but to work on the family farm. From dusk to dawn, he planted and harvested crops, raised the animals, and stockpiled firewood. When Louis turned 10 years old, life became even more difficult. His mother passed away, and soon after, his father remarried. Louis' stepmother bore hatred for him, and she spared no moment in making Louis' life miserable. Eventually, Louis decided that he had endured enough pain. When he turned 13, Louis quietly slipped away from the farmhouse and headed to Paris. Louis had no money or food with him at this point. He just knew that he had to leave his family. Fortunately, Louis found odd jobs with artisans and craftsmen who taught him how to work with metal, stone, fabrics, and wood. Although he did not know it yet, but Louis was now learning valuable skills which would enable him to pioneer modern luggage and create a billion-dollar luxury brand. Still, at that point in time, Louis often had no money left over for shelter and was homeless. Left with no other choice, he would sleep in the woods with only a cloak to keep him warm. At the time, the first railway line to Paris had just opened. Travel became more accessible, and the service industry started to grow rapidly. Craftsmen capitalized on this by making customized briefcases for aristocrats and the upper-class members of society. Such people often traveled with paintings, instruments, and furniture, and needed boxes that could withstand a heavy weight for extended periods of time. They also needed specialized containers to pack their delicate belongings in order to protect them from damage. Since Louis had been working with several craftsmen, he had a working knowledge of some of the skills required to make boxes and other containers. He decided to try his luck by attempting to work in the trade. It was during this time that a craftsman named Monsieur Marichal hired Louis as an apprentice. While Louis didn't earn much, his willingness to learn paid off very well for him. He soon gained expertise in the trade and became a favorite among Monsieur Marichal's clients. Soon, Louis had become so popular that the Empress of France appointed him as her personal box maker. After working for the Empress for a year, Louis had gained enough capital and recognition to open his first shop. Now that Louis had become a master of the craft, he often came up with ideas for new products that would change the industry standard. At the time, traditional boxes were made with leather and were always shaped like a rectangle. The lids were shaped like a domed semicircle so that any liquid that falls on the top of the box would run off instead of soaking through the leather and thereby damaging the box. Owing to this design, it was not possible to stack up the boxes on one another, and loading them on the trains was an arduous task. To tackle these problems, Louis experimented with new materials and settled on a material called canvas. Compared to leather, canvas was lighter, more durable, and more water-resistant. Using canvas as the base material allowed boxes to have simple flat lids, which made it possible to stack them and made it easier to load as well. Louis' new product marked the birth of modern luggage. While customers were initially skeptical of its advantages, it soon took off and became known as an elegant must-have accessory. Louis then set his sights on creating the modern handbag. At the time, handbags were not embraced by society. People believed that handbags were inelegant, bulky, and not an appropriate accessory. However, Louis believed otherwise and started making handbags with canvas. They were an immediate success and created a demand for more designs so that women could pair them with different outfits. Eventually, Louis could not keep up with the increasing orders and enlisted help from his son, Georges. Learning from his father, Georges also came up with new ideas that would disrupt the industry. Georges created a tumbler lock that turned trunks into treasure chests and prevented potential thefts. Up until then, most trunks had locks that could be easily picked. The family's business was booming. But soon after, production came to a halt. A war erupted and destroyed the business, making Louis homeless for a second time. As the Franco-Prussian War erupted, Louis and his family were forced to leave their house and close down their workshop in Paris. They had to relocate to a cramped shelter, which they shared with thousands of other refugees. Food became so scarce that the family nearly starved to death. When the war ended, Louis returned to his home and workshop. However, upon returning, he was dealt another cruel hand of fate, as he saw that his workshop was destroyed and some of his materials were stolen. However, being a true fighter that he was, instead of lamenting, Louis used the remainder of his savings and immediately started working on rebuilding his workshop and opening a new shop. As property prices dropped due to the war, Louis was able to purchase a plot of land in an upscale district. Within months of reopening, business was thriving once again, and this time, orders came in from all over the world. With this, Louis now felt the need to try new innovative designs. Louis's new designs were a hit, and people started to use his accessories as a status quotient to stand out and show how up-to-date they are. With increasing fame and success, Louis decided to open a shop in London in order to cope with the growing list of international orders. This expansion led to diversifying his clientele, which included a greater number of royals and the aristocrats. Soon, Louis Vuitton was recognized as the designer whose products could be found in the homes of the elite and the upper strata of society. But within that year, in 1892, an unexpected tragedy hit the business. Louis suddenly passed away in his home at the age of 72. The cause of his death remains unknown. It was now up to Louis' son, Georges, to take on his father's unfinished business plans. Georges wasted no time in growing the business and traveled to the United States in search of newer opportunities. From the visit, he learned that the business needed an international sales network. And soon, he met a man named John Wanamaker to help him with just that. John Wanamaker was the person who pioneered the concept of the department store and also invented the price tag. After meeting Georges, he started selling LV merchandise in his New York department store. He became the first in the United States to carry the brand. Georges, now supported by his son, Gaston, continued to follow in Louis' footsteps and created new, innovative designs. As time went on, Georges had toured all over the United States and eventually built a solid distribution network. Everything was going smoothly and the business was expanding rapidly. However, tragedy struck and history repeated itself once again. Georges passed away in 1936, leaving Gaston to complete his father's and his grandfather's unfinished plans all by himself. Gaston's journey had an unfortunate start. The Second World War soon erupted, and business contracts had to be cancelled. Clients could not afford the products, and Gaston had no choice but to shut down the company factory and all the stores. Some historical notes claim that Gaston had become so desperate for survival that he collaborated with the Nazi Party in Germany. Although these claims have not been entirely verified. Once the war ended, Gaston tasked his three sons, Henry, Jacques, and Claude, with rebuilding the company. Under their father's guidance, the three sons ensured superior product quality, and slowly, the business picked up once again. However, after Gaston passed away, the business began to stagnate. Moreover, Henry, Jacques, and Claude were divided on how to run the company. To resolve the conflict and bring in a fresh mentality, the three sons asked their sister's husband, Henry Racamier, to take over the business. Henry Racamier was believed to have a keen business acumen, as he had already founded and sold a steel trading company for a large profit. Henry Racamier took the company in a new direction by shifting the sale of LV products from wholesale to retail outlets. He also tapped into the Asian market. The strategy was a success, as within 6 years, sales soared from $20 million to over a massive $260 million. It was around this time that Henry decided to take the company public. The company's stock sold out after more than 1 million shares were sold. However, it was soon observed that sale of many counterfeit goods were on the rise. As a result, the company's stock price started to fluctuate. Nevertheless, Henry forged ahead with opening stores all over the world. Once again, Henry's tactics proved effective, as LV reached a record $1 billion in sales. Post this achievement, Louis Vuitton merged with Moet Hennessy, a champagne and cognac producer, to form a luxury goods conglomerate titled LVMH. The merger, though, brought bad news for Henry, as he often found himself embroiled in management disputes with Moet Hennessy's president, Alain Chevalier. Henry Racquemire wanted to maintain control over the entire company, and to aid him in this venture, Henry asked a property developer named Bernard Arnault to be his ally. Bernard Arnault agreed to help Henry Racquemire, but soon, Henry realized that Bernard had ambitions of his own. Bernard secretly bought a controlling interest in LVMH for himself and gathered support from the Moet and Hennessy families. Afterwards, a legal battle between Henry and Bernard ensued. The courts favored Bernard, and Henry was forced to step down. From then on, it was observed that LVMH came up short as compared to other luxury brands. It was considered a smaller business, and eventually, sales began to plummet. Then, a man named Yves Carcel was appointed to lead LVMH, and the company once again began coming up with new and bold ideas, and things started to change. The company invited many fashion designers and collaborated with them to produce new luxury products. The scheme was well received and put LVMH back on the map. Since then, the company has expanded into a multitude of products, including watches, jewelry, and sunglasses, and continues to launch iconic bags. The company also focuses on making every product in-house. Craftsmen hired by the company are trained for a period of 2 years. Today, LVMH ranks as the #1 luxury brand in the world, and its valuation has topped $30 billion. And it all started with a poor boy who often had no money for food and would have to sleep on the streets of Paris. Anyways, that is all for this video. I hope you had a good time. Please smash that like button and subscribe to this channel for more. Thank you and take care.